evening, we will be talking or discussing domestic violence. For those who don't know who we are a group of professionals who are licensed. We have interns, we have students, we have case managers, social workers, all part of the Society of Black Mental Health Professionals. Our goal in the community is to be able to educate, to inform and empower our community in regards to mental health, especially in the Black community. And so, with that being said, we have this association. This is our year in. We just celebrated our anniversary back in April of earlier this year. And so we are on the mission of doing webinars. Since COVID hit, we have been doing virtual support webinars where people can tune in, and hopefully soon that you guys can go on our website to be able to download these sessions, to be able to see the things that we've been talking about. Some of the topics that we have discussed already, we talked about anxiety, we talked about how to manage your stress. And so today we wanted to kind of hit on domestic violence. My name is Crystal Kelly. I am the president of the Society of Black Mental Health Professionals. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Hakeem Muhammad. For those who may not see him right now, he will be on speaker. He's just having technical difficulties at this moment. Before I bring him on, for those who are on and those who will be coming on, if you could please mute yourself. We don't want to have any background noise or anything like that as he gives his presentation. Mr. Hakeem, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Hakeem Muhammad. Born and raised here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. My background is in domestic violence in terms of working in the community, helping those that are coming out of domestic violence and connecting them with the proper resources so they can better further, their life and, get themselves, back on the right path, I should say. And also a little more context, what I want to discuss this evening. And I just want to thank you, Madam President, for the fantastic work you've been doing with the Society of Black Mental Health Professionals. For a disclaimer, I'm not representing any organization in particular, but what I want to discuss this evening is dealing with this domestic violence, what it consists of, what is not, as well as different types of abuse that's out there, and also looking at this what we term a cycle of violence, which is a diagram to get people more familiar with why do people stay in a very abusive relationship in the first place. So hopefully I can give you some context this evening on that. And last but not least, at the very end, I'll look to do a Q&A so people, we can, ask some questions. And the very last thing, I would like to provide some resources, some numbers for people that's actually going through an abusive relationship, like what steps do you need to take to get out of that, or do you might even know somebody that's in an abusive relationship. So that's pretty much the context I want to cover this evening, though.
Okay, and we do have a PowerPoint. So yes, just let us know, Hakeem, let our IT person know to be able to switch the pages so that we'll all be able to see it.
Okay, so if we dealing with domestic violence in the part where right underneath that where it says domestic violence is, I'll just read the first two parts right here. So domestic violence, does that make sense? It spills over into all facets of society. Now this other part I'm about to read, like domestic violence heals, I'm really going to iterate because it's going to really be the crux of my discussion this evening. So domestic violence heals the establishment of control and fear in an intimate relationship through the use of violence and or forms of abuse. Also, a definitive pattern of behaviors in a relationship. So those two parts I'm probably going to go back to on a regular. I'll read the rest of this. Learn through observation, experience, and reinforcement. Intentional illegal, and often all too often fatal.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to the first part, what I just read is like, does that make sense? Now, there have been multiple studies and research dealing with domestic violence, and also there's another term that's out there with referred to intimate partner violence as well. So I might be using that term as well this evening. So at the end, nobody really knows. I mean, we have various correlations based upon if you grew up in a very abusive environment and you saw your mother, being abused or being an abuser, you might either be that of the victim or that of the perpetrator or the abuser. Mm-hmm. And also the second part where it says spills over into all facets of society, that means literally everybody, regardless of your socioeconomic status, your educational background, of your ethnicity, Black, white, Native American, Latinx, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It pretty much affects everybody. And also, like I say, the establishment, control, and fear in the intimate relationship through the use of violence and forms of abuse. Because a lot of times we get into a relationship, and we all have to admit, things that we have done in the past that we're not proud of, but that doesn't necessarily make us an abuser. So those two parts, I really want to emphasize the establishment, control, and fear in the intimate relationship, as well as the definitive pattern of behaviors in a relationship that really defines it. Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna go on to the next part where it said domestic violence may involve children, parents, and elderly relatives. Not happen often, threats are often just as effective at actually committing the act, and increase in frequency and severity while appropriate intervention. Mm-hmm. And let me focus on the second part right here where it says domestic violence may. All too often, I believe people in society, we have this notion that, somebody that's in a very abusive relationship is something that always happen on a regular. Right. You might be in a relationship, it might happen one time, it might be weeks, months, it might even be the next year before the next incident might occur. So I think that's one notion I really want to dispel this evening. Yep. So, Madam President, anything that I had covered so far you want to?
Yeah, when it says, the part where it says domestic violence may involve children, parents, and elderly relatives, does that include family pets? Because I know I had a few incidents where clients had came to me, their partner had abused their pets to get to them. So is that a form of domestic violence as well?
Yes, it is, and I'm glad you asked that because when I do an intake and bring somebody into a shelter, seeking shelter and fleeing domestic violence, and our questionnaire, that's one of our questions, and also that's another form of abuse as well, directing it towards the pet, right? Unfortunately.
Okay.
I think also I'm so happy that we really focus on the subject matter this evening to the fact that COVID-19, with the pandemic, shelter in place, unfortunately, you have, people that's dealing with domestic violence before this happened, and they might have some reprieve when the abuser will leave the home,
right,
go to work, but now with massive unemployment, the country is literally in a depression at this point, and also state, orders, even though things around the country has started opening up, but of course that intensity of the focus of the abuser on the abuse has intensified, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I know from what I had heard from reports of just the numbers have just gone up for people just calling in the domestic violence hotline and people seeking help because of COVID-19, not being able to go places, like you just said, usually people are able to kind of get away or have that break when their partner's not there, if they're going to work or going out. But with us being shelter in place, yeah, it was definitely an increase in domestic violence for sure.
Oh, yes. And I see that at my workplace as well, unfortunately. you know, dealing with people directly fleeing from domestic violence. I mean, it's really sad, but of course, I'm very happy in the position I am that it disperse information as well as connecting people with the resources so they can, you know, make that transition to have a more, you know, come into a safe and clean environment, I should say.
Okay, that's good. That's great.
All right. Well, Madam President, let me go ahead and finish up this portion of the slide where it says domestic violence is not. So domestic violence is not caused by genetics, mental illness, anger, stress, alcohol, and drugs, or the behavior of the victim. An appropriate expression of anger or jealousy, a crime of passion, culturally or religiously accepted, a private family matter. And just going back to the first point where it says domestic violence is not, because it's so often, and let me also disclose this. My focus is on the victim, and I'm not saying that there's no help for the abuse, but if you look at the studies and statistics, it's kind of like a mixed bag when it comes down to abusers in terms of them getting help. You know, I remember going to a study, to a training maybe like over a year or so ago, and the person was saying, like, this was based upon, of course, back in the 70s, the statistic I'm about to quote, but they said there's maybe like a 4 or 5% chance for abuser to change their ways, even if they seek help. Now, of course, you know, I'm a firm believer, you know, when it comes down to just being a spiritual person, that if a person really want to change, that obviously a person have the ability to change.
Right.
However, in my line of work, I just focus on the victim in terms of them, you know, seeking help and trying to, you know, overcome their abuser. But what I want to focus on, I hear that so much when I deal with somebody coming out of an abusive relationship, like, well, they was just stressed, or, you know, well, maybe I did something wrong, you know, call them, get angry, or, well, this person drank or they use drugs, or it's the genetics, or maybe, you know, something is wrong with them, or something happened to them when they was a child. But it's always they give an excuse to the abuser. But even though of all those different factors, that's not an excuse to abuse. And I can go through each and every one of them, you know, because, of course, being angry, being stressed, we all get angry, we all get stressed.
Right.
And, of course, if you use alcohol or drugs, now does everybody that use drugs or alcohol, does everybody physically harm somebody or lash out somebody? Of course not, you know. And also the behavior of the victim, or they saying it's mental illness or genetics. But so our whole emphasis is really to let the victim know, to let the survivor know, domestic violence, that no, it's them. They are they the one that made the choice. Even though these factors might contribute somewhat, but at the end, it was their decision. You know.
Yeah, and I'm glad you emphasized that it's their choice, because I think a lot of times people get it twisted of thinking it's a mental illness or it's because of alcohol or drugs. I mean, yeah, it could be those contributing factors, but at the end of the day, it's a choice. It's a choice whether they want to put their hands on somebody. So I'm glad you emphasized that.
Thank you, Madam President. And also I want to say, you know, just dealing in your particular field of therapy, of course, you know, just based upon statistics, that somebody that's mentally ill is more likely to be a victim of violence, not a perpetrator of violence. So that's another thing that needs to be, you know, emphasized too, I should say.
Yes. Awesome. All right.
All right, Madam President, before we move on to the next slide, is there anything else that you saw on there you want to tackle before we move on to the next one?
No. I mean, if anybody out there have any questions, please type it in. We definitely want to make sure that you guys are being heard as well. So this is a lot of great information that Mr. Hakeem is giving out. So this is great.
All right, so what we're going to do now is dealing with the different types of abuse. If we can move on to that particular slide.
Okay, we're on here.
All right. So I think the more common one what people think about is the physical abuse. So we can look at that. Of course, the shoving, biting, poisoning, blocking your exit, threats, or use of any weapons, slapping, strangling. But I always, on this part of the training, I always like to, ask questions like, is anything that really stands out that you probably never thought about, or you want to, mention?
Yeah, one thing that really stands out for me is withholding somebody's medication.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't think that, yeah, that never would have crossed my mind that would be a form of abuse.
Oh yes, oh yes. And again, I'll go back to that in the beginning of the training where I want to emphasize the establishment of control,
Right.
and fear and instrument in the use of violence and forms of abuse and definitive pattern of behaviors in a relationship. So again, it's not just an isolated incident, this or that. And of course, if you're doing things such as kicking a punch, I mean that's not a good thing.
Right.
So I'm not saying you got to have all these different, types of physical abuse or verbal or emotional to say, hey, you're an abuser. I mean, just doing one of them is not a good thing. But yeah, of course, like you said, we're on medication. Yeah, because of course, if you look at it on a physical level, you're actually harming that person.
Yeah, that's true.
Most likely, the person is on medication. Most likely, it's prescribed to them by a doctor, which means it's for their physical health.
That's right. That's very true. Very good point.
Yeah. And then one thing I always noticed when I first saw this too, upon coming into domestic violence training, is black and white interest. And you would exit, so you really won't think, oh, what's wrong with that? Is and a person, an abuser might justify it by saying, well, I don't need you to run off. We need to talk about this right now, and But of course, that is another means of abuse as compared to the other ones that might seem very obvious.
Right. Very true. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
So let's talk about verbal.
Oh yeah. So looking at verbal, and that means the communication have to use to demean, scare, and control, yelling, accusing, embarrass, insults, belittles, blaming, mocks, threats of physical harm to you, family, and pets, etc. So of course that's something we just discussed right there.
Yeah.
Sit downs, name calling, and joking. And that's another thing that really stood out to me. But how about you, though, Madam President?
Another one for verbal is sarcasm. Yeah, that's one that really stands out to me as you have it as a verbal form of abuse.
And a lot of times we might look at that like, well, what's wrong with that?
Right.
Being sarcastic or joking. But of course, going back to that point, I always want to emphasize this thing. It's like the center of pattern of abuse, And also, if you're doing it enough, I mean, it is a means of abuse, because you really, on a verbal level, harming that person, I should say, through demean. Yeah.
Okay.
So anything else on that category of verbal?
No, everything pretty much explains itself. Let's move on to the emotional.
Emotional.
Yeah.
Okay. So emotional behaviors and or actions used to demean, scare, and control. So of course, some of them being stalking, controlled money, sleep deprivation, threats of suicide, getting custody of children, etc. Denied affection, isolation, intimidation, annoying, manipulation, twist words, events, snaring, mind games, and subcause mail, denies and cheats.
Mm.
So is there anything that stands out? Because there's several of them that stands out to me.
Okay.
Emotional.
Yeah, so the twist of words or events, that one stands out to me. Intercepts calls and mail, that's another one that pretty much stands out.
And I think that actually goes to, again, that last word. If you look at the definition of emotional abuse, is control.
Yeah,
you know, it's all about control.
Mm-hmm. And I also think with this particular form of abuse, the thing that sticks out to me is gaslighting. You know, a lot of gaslighting that takes place because you're playing with somebody's mind. You know what I'm saying? You're playing with somebody's emotions. So that's a big one that stands out to me as well.
Yes, it does. I mean, and again, it's all about mind control.
Yeah.
It's all about, you really minimizing or like, well, I didn't say that, So it makes the person think something's really wrong with them, but it's really they the one.
That's right.
That causes this too.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's big.
Yeah. And also, I want to emphasize there's a few other things right here. Like I said, controls money. Now, you would think that you're going to need the financial, but of course, if you control money, you still spot emotions.
Yeah, because it's tied to it. It's tied to it. That's true.
Yes. Since we're in a capitalistic society, of course, you're dealing with spot emotion, but of course, that can be interchangeable with the next category, a couple of categories down, which is financial and legal as well. But also another thing I really want to emphasize, the isolation part right here. Mm-hmm. Now, the isolation is very big for a abuser. And the reason why is going back to the C word, control.
Yeah.
So it might start out such as, being innocent, you get with a person and you decide to go steady, you decide to form a relationship with this person. Mm-hmm. And the person will say, well, why can't we just spend more time together? Mm-hmm. Because you might be a person that's very family oriented.
Right.
In which you deal with your parents, you deal with your cousins, aunts, uncles, or you might just have a large group of friends that you deal with.
Right.
So, of course, innocently, it might start off such as, well, I just want to spend more time with you. Why can't we just spend more time? And of course, you say, oh, yeah, sure not. And then you notice it's a pattern. Mm. And then before you know it, the people that you're dealing with, they wonder what's going on with you. Like, why don't you come around anymore?
Yeah, very true.
But that's the means of controlling. Before you know it, you don't have anybody. And then, unfortunately, when the abuser isolates you, which means they can do more harm to you. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times, people on the outside looking in, we might not, a person might not see that, and they think maybe everything's fine.
That's true. Very true.
And I think that's another notion why people wonder why people stay in an abusive relationship, So it's not as if everything start off very bad from the jump. It's usually a steady progression of the abuse, of the physical, of the verbal, of the emotional. Mm-hmm. And the physical might even come into it weeks, months, or years later.
Yeah.
And that's another thing too, But yeah, I think that's very big in terms of control when it comes down to isolating, somebody.
And then next thing you know, they look around and they don't have any family or, friends, they all kind of disappeared. And they were like, what happened to him? It's the fact that he did, whoever the abuser is in the relationship, that was their ultimate goal, is to exactly isolate.
Oh, yes.
For them to rely on them more.
That's right. And again, once you isolate them, you have that person more under control. And, and not even with the person that's in the midst of this, the person receiving the abuse, of course, hindsight, they can say, wow, why didn't I see that in the get-go? But a lot of times it's something that steadily, slowly happens,
Mm-hmm.
So again, part of this training, I hope to really emphasize to the public and those that's actually listening to this is that, you know, it's a reason why people stay in an abusive relationship.
Right,
You know?
right.
It's not just, you know, they want to accept the abuse, but it's something steady and something that progresses, you know, along. Yeah, but Madam President, anything else in that category?
No, I mean, you hit all the points that I could think of. And again, if anybody have any questions, please let us know. But let's move on to the financial and legal forms of abuse.
Okay. All right, so financial and legal, and the emphasis on this one is leaves a victim with limited resources. So prevents you from getting or keeping a job, prevents knowledge of the family finances, refusal to have your name on any accounts, reports or threatens to report you to DCS, files for temporary custody, withhold documentation and verification, refuse to work, withholds money, call police if you fight back, obtains protective orders first, runs credit, sabotage public assistance. So there's a whole lot of different things we can tackle in here, and unfortunately, dealing with clients over the years, everything that on this report, on this part, had been done. Because I had a client I know one time, they had mentioned like I wonder what happened to my documentation, like my birth certificate, my security card. You know, and they thought it was crazy. Like, wait a minute, you got this place. But it seems like you keep on coming up missing.
Yeah.
You know. And so anything stand out to you though, Madam President?
Yeah, ruins credit. I mean, that one really stands out. You know, you have going into this relationship, you have this built up credit, and then over the years or even, you know, time, you know, you become, you don't have it. You don't have it anymore because of the other person, you know, taking advantage of the of your credit, the situation where you have to solely rely on that person.
Yeah, and I think you really hit it. And of course, like the victims have limited sources, like you said, because basically, so they can rely more on that person.
That's right. That's right.
You know.
Wow.
And another thing, like call police if you fight back. You know, so they the first one to go to the police, knowing that they was in the wrong in the first place, just because now you decided to think yourself. Yeah. So.
It's kind of is more like your word against theirs.
Yes.
Type of the situation. Okay. Okay. How about the religious form of abuse? This is a really good one right here.
Oh yes, it is, and again, well, religion, a very strong form of verbal or emotional abuse. So citing scripture to justify abuse of demeaning otherwise oppressive behavior. Installing religious guilt for not doing what they want. So, unfortunately, this is more from a male perspective. Unfortunately, when you come down to religious abuse,
right?
And I saw that firsthand because I know before COVID, we used to have volunteers to come and give more like Bible-oriented, you know, class.
Right,
you know?
right.
And of course, you know, that's the volunteer have, you know, a means to actually go and cite that, and usually we have staff in there too. But that's one thing I really recognize. If somebody was like, "Oh, I don't want to go to it," it's not because they might not be religious. I mean, of course, they believe in God and not believe in God. That's everybody's choice.
Right.
But a lot of times we don't realize it might be because they came out of a relationship in which they use scripture to be abusive towards them. You know, so that's something to be very mindful of dealing with. You know, person coming out of domestic violence situation, I should say.
Very good point. And then the rest of them you have under the religious?
Shaming or belittling partner for their religious beliefs, forcing partners to violate their religious beliefs. You know, it could be something as simple as, "Hey, I don't eat pork," you know, and the person and the viewer is like, "Well, you need this, even though the person told them, like, hey, this is my belief system,
Right.
but still it's a violation as a form of abuse, though, because you steadily try, and again, this is a very strong form of verbal and emotional abuse. It goes back to that definitive pattern of behavior, I should say.
That's right. That's right. Wow, this is really good. Really good.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Let's see some other parts I wanna. But let me just say this too. Of course, we just went through all the different types of abuse.
Right.
That's on here, and of course, if you know somebody or you yourself is facing this, I will be giving out some numbers that you can call to get you some help.
Yeah.
But one thing I want to say before we move on, if you're in a very abusive relationship, the most dangerous time is when you leave. And the reason why it's so dangerous when you leave is because the abuser loses that control over you. And unfortunately, sometimes that mentality of, well, if I can't have you, nobody else can have you.
Yeah, very
So
true.
we always want to teach people about having a safety plan. And a safety plan is basically documentation, or very important documentation from birth certificate, marriage license, lease, or your property, credit cards, other financial documentation. Keep that in a place where you can go to instantly to grab it and leave. And also, not only that, like realize what areas of the house or apartment is a safe place to be at to escape. I always tell people, if you living in a house, of course, the living room because of the front room or
Right.
or the front window. Never go to the kitchen or basement or the garage, because those places have instruments such as tools or knives and things like that the abuser can use against you. And also use come out with a code word or code term, and also have a list of people that you can communicate with, such as who can you go to stay with,
Right.
but also be mindful of that usually abuser will go to whoever that person believe you're closest to.
Right.
So you gotta be mindful of that. But what other people that you can go to, they might not know about necessarily or know where you live at, that you can go to for a few days. Who can you go to borrow some money from? And also let your neighbors know what the situation is going on, or give them a code word. If you have kids, give them a code word. So you might say, hey, I'm about to go to the show, or I need to go to the store to pick up some milk. But really going to the store to pick up milk means that I'm in danger, or
That's right.
it's like the situation is getting heated. So having code words, having important documentation, having a place to keep that material so you can instantly grab it and leave. So this is something that we work with a person that just loves the abusive relationship, because we always say that may God forbid that you return.
That's right.
Or get back into a violent relationship, but you want to have a safety plan in place, because of having that safety plan, your means of survival shoots up dramatically, because you have that plan in place. Because a lot of times and of course we can go through this, but I know we're getting close to the end, because I do want to have the Q&A so we answer some questions.
Yeah, you're doing
great.
great.
I'm going to give out the resources, but man, I kind of forgot what I was saying.
No, this is good. I mean, you're doing great. I mean, having a safety plan. I mean, because it can't be it's a life and death situation. So having all those things in place I can see it can be very, very crucial. Very crucial.
Oh yes. Oh yeah, but this is the part I want to say before we move on to the cycle of violence, and that is, it takes on average a person in an abusive relationship 7 times to finally get out of a relationship. So again, people don't realize that it takes multiple times. The person has strong feelings for the abuser, and they might have kids with the abuser. So it's various factors, and they might be financially limited. That's why they can't leave. And, just having that emotional bond, even though they do horrible things. But of course, what we're going to go into next, we're going to discuss the cycle of violence. So that kind of gives people understanding of what's biologically, somewhat going on with a person that's the abuser as well as the victim of the abuse. So we want to go to the cycle of violence. We can talk about that, and then we can get into the Q&A that I give out the resource.
Okay.
Mr. Hakeem, I have a question.
Yes,
I was just going to ask, when you say it takes 7 times, are you saying that they actually leave 7 times, or there's just been 7 incidents where maybe the police has been called, or can you explain that a little bit further?
Well, actually, it's all of the above, but to be more specific, when I say 7 times, meaning that they leave, and then of course the abuser say, well, maybe I'll make sure I would never do it again, come back and it's gonna be different. And they say, okay, let me go back, give the person another chance. Or it might be like, wow, I really miss that person. And let me go back. So it is that understanding, because it's almost like addiction, I should say. So we know it's research that, it might take somebody several times to keep the habit. So it's kind of like on an emotional level with domestic violence stuff. So that's why I said on average, it usually takes 7 times, which means it could be less, or it can actually be more than 7 times before a person actually breaks out and leaves the abuser, I should say.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, so dealing with the cycle of violence, so you got 3 phases. You got the tension building phase, you got the explosion phase, you got the calm phase. Now, this in a virtual show of hands, who all have been on a roller coaster ride? So I know I have. I know you can't see because of having technical difficulties, but I love roller coaster rides. So the tension building phase deals with when you get in the seat, you finally waited after an hour and a half to 2 hours to finally get on the actual ride. So what they do, they buckle you in, and then you start a slow descent going upward. You hear that clicking of the noise. So looking at the tension building phase, so from the abuser may begin to blame, threaten, belittle the victim, monitor, control victim, jealously escalate, and accuse victim of sleeping around, not doing chores. And then from the victim may try to change, calm down the abuser, sense increased tension and anger, and the abuser walk on eggshell. So that's the first phase. Now, the explosion phase is when you get that very top of the where the roller coaster at, and then you dip, and then you screaming, and you're yelling, the hands, flying, everything. And so basically, this is when the abuser may use violence or threats, throw objects, use increased verbal, emotional abuse, even rape. And the victim may receive injuries, feel responsible, feel shame, do whatever is necessary to prevent further injury, have fear. And then the calm phase, and of course the calm phase on roller coaster, that's when, the roller coaster ride comes back, and then it's like, whoo, that's over with. But what happens usually? I need to get back on that again. So it's kind of like, in a sense, what's going on with the with the victim, I should say. But the calm phase with the abuser may deny or minimize violence, saying, "Oh, it wasn't a big deal," blame violence on victim, ask for forgiveness, promise to change, stop, or get help, act loving. And the victim may hope or believe the abuser will change, feel relief, minimize the severity of violence. So with the cycle of violence, we can see why I keep on repeating itself. And again, where it might take somebody up to 7 times on average to actually finally break away from that abuser. And hopefully this will explain that cycle better, why somebody keep on going back to the abuser. So with that said, Madam President, do we have any questions you can read to me?
Well, I want to go back to that cycle of violence. I mean, that was a great way of how you explained it, of being on a roller coaster. I mean, that is like being on a roller coaster, the ups and downs of it. When it comes to someone being involved in a relationship, an abusive relationship, that's exactly the feelings. 1 minute they're good, next minute, they got to walk on eggshells. Next minute, everything's like exploding. So that's a great way to kind of explain that.
Oh yes, because I think a lot of times, and we all do it. I'm guilty of it too. We always will look at somebody else and say, well, why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? But we really haven't walked in their shoes, so we really don't know. So my whole emphasis on this training is really get the general public to realize that, it's not that simple to actually just to leave.
That's right.
There's all these various factors, there's all these different types of abuse and mind games being played, even isolation and lack of resources where a person can leave, or if they did leave, would they actually be able to go to, so far before they actually have to return because they have kids to attend to.
Right.
So I really want people to realize that at the same time, if somebody is going through it or they think somebody going through it, like, hey, these are some various resources that you can get in, that you can check out for yourself that, get you some help too. So
yeah. One thing I do want to point out when it comes to a person being or not, it's hard for that person to leave that abusive relationship. Would you say that person feeling shame or feel like they may be judged if they, coming from trying to come out of that abusive relationship and realizing, they don't have the family or the support, and not only that, they could be feeling ashamed because of them thinking that they allow this person to have this much control over them.
Oh yes, it's all of the above, Madam President. That's we can tackle each and every point. Feeling shame, of course, because again, most abusive relationships don't start off with the abuse necessarily. It's something kind of minor happen, and they kind of like, they kind of feel funny about it, but it's like it's kind of minor. And you got to remember, it's not something that happens often. But of course, as time progresses, sometimes it does happen more frequently and happen more often, in which the abuse might flare up. It could be not just physical; it could even be verbal abuse. From the joking and sarcasm to name calling. To being very downright, very disrespectful. And that really beats somebody down. And then, of course, like I say, the shame aspect of it. Because going back to the isolation piece, like I say, they might not have friends or family because the abuser was able to push everybody that was close to that person away from them.
Right.
And I don't want to just say, and I'm not saying this from the victim being a woman as well as the abuser being a man, even though unfortunately most cases it is, because statistically speaking, it's like 1 out of every 4 women in a lifetime, unfortunately will go through domestic violence as compared to 1 out of every 10 men. So of course you do have some women that are abusers too.
Right.
But I do want to make that distinction. But of course, going back to my point of isolation, they pushed everybody out. So of course, they kind of ashamed to actually ask for help. Or it might have been that the family members been telling them all the time, like, I told you that person ain't no good. You need to leave the person and boo, boo, boo. And then, of course, they had that shame, like, wow, why didn't I listen to them?
Right.
Why didn't I listen to my mom? Why didn't I listen to my dad? Why didn't I listen to my aunt when they was telling me about this person? So there's a sense of shame, So from our end, I think think we should always be supportive, never cut somebody off, always be there for them, even if they're not ready to leave.
That's right.
Because it's just like somebody that's on drugs or alcohol, that's a decision they have to make. We can't make it for them, but we just want to have that support there for them to say, hey, I'm still here for you.
Very true.
Yeah.
I know that you weren't able to go through the whole packet, but I'm so happy you were able to hit on key points. I do want to emphasize that we do have the PowerPoint presentation on here for, once it's downloaded on our website, people will have access to the PowerPoint presentation. So I just want to make that so people can be aware of that, because it's so much information, a lot of good information.
Oh yeah.
Mr. Hakeem, I have a question.
A lot of people really don't understand what is intimate partner violence or domestic violence, what it consists of. But I think a lot of people mind, they just look at, it's a woman being abused by a man, and he hit her against the head on a regular basis. But it's so much more complexity to that situation, and so much widespread that people don't really realize. Because most likely we all know somebody that's abused or being abused, even though we might not have personal knowledge of it. That's how widespread it is in society. And it has nothing to do with your race. Unfortunately, even though statistically more people of color is being is in abusive relationships, but of course there's people that's affluent, people that's white, European Americans, they go through it too, because I had dealt with all types from different socioeconomic backgrounds, black, white, Latino, Asian, even Native American, clients. So, like I said, it affects all facets of society in that regards.
Miss Kelly, did you have a question?
No, that was me.
Oh, Miss Nikki, I'm sorry.
No, that was Mari.
Oh, Mari, I want to get it right. I'm sorry. Go ahead with your question.
So, listening to the different components that you have been discussing, it makes me raise the question of, should we be, because a lot of us as mental health professionals and just people in general, I've dealt with it with my clients and with my family and my friends going through this. It sounds like in order for their exit to be successful, they have to prepare in multiple different components of their life, mentally, physically, financially. You discussed how part of the abuse is to eliminate and make those things harder. So it sounds, and like I'm such a goal-oriented type person that I'm like, what should I say? I literally had a best friend going through this and refused to cut her off, but I didn't know what to tell her, because everything we've discussed is absolutely true. They don't have any family. They don't have the financial resources. It's better to be abused than it is to be homeless, resourceless, isolated, and all the other components that come with it. So I guess my question is, what things should we be telling them to tackle first? It sounds like there's going to be a level of self-esteem and strength to mentally handle. There's going to be a level of financial that's going to be necessary for them to be able to be sustainable. There's going to be a level of physical, because like you said, right after they leave, that's the most dangerous time. So it's like, what do we tell them? What do we tell them to handle in the immediate so that their exit can be successful? Because a lot of them leave in the heat of the moment or in the emotion of the moment and then have to return because of the things you said, like children, resources, needs, all of the above.
Well, that's why I would say the first thing you can do, I would say, I guess this is probably the final part of of the training, to give them resources, because we do have great organizations in our community, such as the YWCA. Maybe some of my, because that's what I work for as well. We had the Center for Nonviolence, so, but those two institutions are alone. I mean, we have a wide range of resources in terms of tackling the financial, the self-esteem component. I mean, even the physical shelter, in terms of removing themselves out of the dangerous situation. Even if they're not ready to be removed out of the situation, we have a program which we refer to as the community programs, which we have case managers that will actually meet with them in the community. They won't go to a residence, but they will meet them at a library or a coffee shop or something like that. And they can actually work with them, getting a safety plan together, work with them, getting a protective order in which, we can actually sit down and get them a protective order file. I mean, so there's many different components, but I say that's probably one of the best things you can do. Besides just saying, hey, I'm here for you, I support you, I just want you to know you're not alone. I don't want you to feel shame for in the situation that you're in, that, hey, I got your back, but just to give them those resources, the call. Because that's something they have to be willing to do.
Right.
But yeah, but like I said, definitely let them know about, hey, make sure you have your safety plan. But even though you might not be familiar with in the safety plan, that's why I always go back to saying, hey, call this number, call this organization, because they can walk you through all that so you can make that move not only successfully, but being very safe at the same time too.
Yeah, and we actually have the resource for helps page up. So everything that you have mentioned, the YMCA, the YWCA, domestic violence services, the Center for Nonviolence. I mean, we have it up right now. So I'm glad to hear you say that. And I wasn't aware that, that they do have case managers that can meet with that person, in public, to get them started with their safety plan and put things into action. That's really good to know.
Yeah, and like I say, they can call any time of day or night. We open 24 hours. I'm referring to the YWCA, in which they can talk to somebody. Because they just might want somebody to talk to them. Many times somebody just call, they just want advice, like, hey, what should I do?
Right.
And, we can just give them advice and just give them those resources, like, hey, we here. These are the steps. However, if you're not ready to physically leave, that's understandable. So we just want to provide that support for them. So when they are ready, that they have a safe place to come to, or at least start the steps with meeting with somebody, which they can discuss what to do,
That's awesome.
and how to get out of the situation.
Mari, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Oh, good. All right, thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Any more comments? We're at that hour mark of 8 o'clock, and I mean, it was a lot of great information, and I just want people to know that the handout with the PowerPoint that will be available soon on our website, so that'll be something that you guys can have access to. But I just want to open it up again, just making sure if anybody else have any questions or comments they want to make regarding our webinar and on Mr. Hakeem and his expertise on this evening.
I'd just like to say, this is Kelly. I'd just like to say thank you to Hakeem for the presentation. I think this will help people in abusive relationships, and I think it'll help people realize that they are in an abusive relationship. They may not realize that they really are in an abusive relationship, and even helping the people that's supporting them, the family members, to understand that you can hold space for them.
That's right.
Even when the person is not ready to leave, and just be prepared. Have your heart and mind prepared for that also, because being a person that that cares about a person that's being abused or not having the mental capacity to understand why they're staying, we can still hold space and love them through this. through this. And like you and you nailed it several times, saying give them resources, and allow them to get the help. So provide the support you can, but you can't do it for them.
That's
So
right.
thank you again for sharing this information. It's very good.
So,
All right. Thank you.
I just want to also comment that it is a wealth of information, and I know that it helps me, every time I hear it, so that I will be able to speak to and help someone who is in a domestic violence situation. Just knowing a little bit more detail about what I can do, knowing that I cannot do it for them, but like Kelly was saying, and like the information that you provided, it just gives me the tools that I can use, to help them, when I can. And so, yeah, and I'm thankful also that it's going to be on our website, Crystal, so that we can have access to it and be able to share it with others. So wonderful job, Mr. Hakeem, and I do appreciate your time and putting this presentation together and sharing it with us. Thank you.
The web address is in chat.
Okay, yes, it's in the chat. Okay, I like that. Awesome. So with that being said, I think this was an hour very well spent. Again, I thank you for everybody who's able to participate in tonight's discussion. And I'm hoping that as time goes on, this continues to grow. And I know we're just getting started. So I'm very thankful for all you guys, because I know I can't do this without you guys. And I appreciate, everybody when it comes to what they can contribute, because everybody has something that they can pour into helping everybody when it comes to discussing mental health. We want to be able to provide a safe haven. We want to be able to provide a safe space for people to be able to ask questions and not feel ashamed. Like, this is the platform to do that, and to be able to get the knowledge that they need to be able to move forward in a healthy way. So again, great job, Mr. Hakeem. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. Do you want to provide the crisis hotline? Do you have that on hand?
Oh, yes, I do. And before I provide that, I want to thank you, Madam President, for this great organization that you started, as well as everybody else that participated in it, because it's very much needed in our community and, just in the world in general, I should say. So, the crisis line, I'll provide a couple of, like, Fort Wayne Sexual Assault Treatment Center is 260-423-2222. Also, the crisis line for the YWCA, I'm going to give the Honda number is 1-800-441-4073, as well as to the same location, 260-424-4908.
Okay. There you have it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Please be watching out for next month's webinar, and where we'll be focusing on suicide. I know suicide is up ever since COVID came into play. And so we definitely want to kind of talk about that and have a platform people can be able to ask questions and to gain information on what to look for when it comes to suicide.
And look forward to it.
All right. That's all I have. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Hakeem.